Thank you very much for coming to this talk on Jung, diamonds, and the porous self. Our world is in crisis. Something seems to be broken at a very deep level, individually and collectively, and our way of life has become dangerously imbalanced and destructive. It seems like huge forces beyond our control are rising up, maybe to restore balance, as the message from the Mother by the Kogi Nation suggests. And that can leave us feeling disorientated, distressed, and powerless. We need something to help us hold what we're living through and to find a way forward, a new understanding. Maybe something Bernardo Kastrup calls a telos, a sense of meaning, purpose, and direction. So last year was, of course, Jung's 150th birthday, and what he says is still relevant. In The Undiscovered Self, Jung warns about a world situation very similar to our own, and he gives us a way forward. He points to an underlying unity. Our inner and outer worlds are related, he says. The physical world and psyche reflect one another because they're ultimately the same thing. And what moves in the outer world also moves in us. That means that, according to Jung, to come through these huge personal and collective challenges, we need to recognize the reality and impact of the psyche inwardly and in the outer world so that we can sense those deep movements and consciously choose how we respond to the psyche's demands. We need to know ourselves as part of something larger than our limited ego consciousness. We need to gain a deeper knowledge of who we really are. And of course, our way of knowing is central to that. We need to involve expanded states of consciousness, which engage our heart, involving an immersion in a fluid, mythical, and symbolic world. This kind of insight is intuitive, embodied, and relational, rather than rationally thought out. And it isn't just subjective, it has an objective reality. From his Red Book, we know Jung's knowledge comes from a reflection on a deep, direct inner experience. This talk is my attempt to apply that process. I will share a bit of my personal journey, which involved some bewildering states and experiences, and show how I've tried to make sense of that. And I'm not an expert on Jung, but his writings were a lifeline to me at times I got frightened. I still find them helpful as I try to engage with the questions that come up for me now. I will also bring in some other people who I think are describing those same underlying forces, though perhaps they're coming at them from a different angle. So, one key question for me is one that Jung also asked. As we open the door to the depth of our psyche, is there something that wants to step over into visible life to take concrete shape? If there is an imminent force that presses to work through us, what is that? And can we consciously engage with it? I will try to explore those questions. So, Jung's insights fundamentally challenge how we think about ourselves and of our mind as being ours. They rock our Western materialist sense of reality. He and others talk about immanent forces as an organizing regulatory principle or intelligence that drives creation. Disruption and illness are meaningful in that context. They show us the imbalances caused by resistance or misalignment to these forces. I'll use Jung's notion of daimons, the concept of relational being, and Bourgeault's understanding of the imaginal realm to explore this. And we'll come back to diamonds, but just as a little preview, diamonds are archetypal patterns or forces experienced in a personalized form. So they're constellated in us individually and in the group field. To give us an anchor, I want to stay as close as I can to my own experience. So I had 3 or maybe 4 entry points into non-ordinary states of consciousness: psychedelics, kundalini, trauma, and to an extent also meditation. All involved feminine, heart-based ways of knowing. To give a bit of context, I'll start with some key experiences in my own life. And I'm not going to talk you through this in any great depth. Just to say, I had some early operations which gave some anxious attachment patterns. I was since childhood looking for something more than material reality. I did some counseling and social work training. And then in 97, I experienced holotropic breath work for the first time, so holotropic breath work is a technique of deep, powerful breathing and music that helps people get into non-ordinary states of consciousness. It was developed by Stan and Christina Groff when Stan's research into the therapeutic applications of LSD was interrupted because it became unlawful. So it immediately gave me an experience of other levels of reality from the material one, and my first experience of what seemed like Kundalini-like or prana-like energies in my body. This bowled me over to such an extent that I decided to do holotropic breathwork training with Stan Groff. And I then had a year out in the States during which I did intensive meditation and experimented with psychedelics, which I'd never done, as an adolescent or in earlier life. And I spent 6 weeks in Mapia, which is a Santo Daime community in the Amazon forest. And they use ayahuasca as part of their ritual worship. So in 99, I had to go back home and start work again as a mental health advocate and then as a social worker in that field. And I felt that I couldn't be opening up myself up that deeply while I was doing that work. So I stopped all practices that encouraged entry into non-ordinary states. The only thing that sometimes still happened was that spontaneously this energy would start happening in mostly during the night for periods of a few weeks to a couple of months. So basically, I had if you like, a fallow period, and for about 15 years, and then in 2016, I resumed holotropic breath work, had another experience of using psychedelics, and then in 2021, when I retired, I I started a 2-year training with the Institute of Psychedelic Therapy. And the energy was more or less active during the night over the period of that training. So at the end of that training, the following year, I started an MSc with the Aleph Trust. And interestingly, the energy stopped, which may be completely coincidental, but it may also be that somehow the intensely intellectual work was somehow not compatible or conducive to the energy flow. After about a term, it was clear to me that I'd taken on too much on top of other things I was doing. So I gave up the MSc, and I'm basically just seeing where where life takes me next. So for me, expanded states come out of holotropic breathwork, meditation, psychedelics, and Kundalini-like energies, and they give an opening to experiences beyond my regular awareness. So there are glimpses of the depths of the psyche in symbolic and embodied ways. Sometimes I have a sense of deep felt connection, and experiences can be light and beautiful, but they can equally well be dark and absolutely terrifying. So the following examples are of experiences with psychedelics where I had an overwhelming sense of an other, a purposeful intelligence which was far greater than me and directed the experience. So this was a mushroom journey in 99, at the end of my year in the States, where I experienced myself as held within an infinite being. I had no body. I was just a reflection or thought in a greater mind, an energy field of love, light, knowledge, wisdom, infinite compassion. And at one point during this journey, I saw Christ as a much larger thought form, if you like, contained within that field or that being and reflecting it. And I could dialogue with this being through Christ as through a portal. And he was one of many such portals. There was Buddha, Muhammad, and so on, all beings of immense love, light, and power, but also reflections and thoughts within that greater field. And Christ seemed to function, to me, he seemed to function as an energetic transformer, somehow, sort of uh, downstepping or upstepping the energy and forming a bridge between infinite being and my small self. This was perhaps a more physical experience where I was flooded with waves of energy, physically moved into certain positions to help me open to the energy and bear it. Um, I felt taken over by a divine feminine being that shielded me from the brightness of a masculine source behind the light. And that had been my intention. I'd asked to be shown the source behind the light. Um, I kept in these waves being seized completely with this torrent of energy pouring through me and out. And I say me, but it didn't really involve me. I was just a channel. I was completely incidental. And the force of the energy was terrifying as well as ecstatic. This was perhaps a more mental or symbolic journey where I experienced um, energy in form of light and color, intense pain and grief. There was a sense of collective suffering. I sometimes feel that we can be called upon to witness the suffering and somehow help to metabolize it in the collective field. The divine presence felt more masculine. I felt drawn into co-creating, or perhaps it was creating through me, the most exquisite energy or light-based architecture, which seemed to be crystallizing out in my awareness or in this shared field. As long as I could hold it, I kept, losing it. And then at the next crescendo, I would enter into it again. And throughout again, I was supported to bear the intensity and power of the experience. So this is an example of a darker experience, which was during my time with the Santo Daime community, using ayahuasca. Um, I didn't want all my examples to be love and light because by no means they aren't always those. But I think there's still a similar dynamic. It felt like there was this numinous entity trying to take over my body, and I was beyond terrified. It was entering me, contorting my face and my body. It was engulfing and strangling me. I had a pain in my heart. I was choking. I felt like it was killing me to get my body and like it was trying to push my soul out of my body. And inwardly, I was told I should accept it. But I was just, that was beyond me. I was too afraid. And I was trying to work out now, is this part of my shadow that I need to engage with and integrate parts of? Um, or is it some nasty that's out there to get me? And I just couldn't tell the difference. So, or which it was. So I just kept saying no, no, no until the medicine wore off. So, such experiences has left me with a need to understand something that feels very meaningful and a longing for further connection to this larger intelligence. And Jung, of course, talks of the search for the self, for a deeper wholeness beyond the boundaries of our ego. And that resonates with what Bernardo Kastrup speaks of, a deep lack that underlies the Western mind, which we try to fill through stories, projections onto the world of matter, like consumerism, addictions. But a lot of us are driven by this deep yearning for something. So, how can we make sense of such experiences? And are there any dangers in entering into these states? And can they tell us something about what is going on for humanity as a whole? Whatever it is, the immediate raw experience is very hard to put into words, and maybe we can't actually fully capture it. It can have a dynamic, enlivening, numinous quality, and it can involve a sense of being filled or held by something, a kind of infusion or possession. For me, some of these experiences involved encounters with what seemed like independent beings or centers of consciousness. So perhaps these experiences fall into two interpenetrating dimensions, like two sides of a coin. You can't really separate them out. They're both implied in each other. They both have a strong emotional component. On the one hand, there is this energetic, embodied physical dimension to the experience, and on the other hand, a more mental, symbolic one. And people have thought about these in different ways in terms of the experience itself, the phenomenology of it, what it says about existence, ontology, and metaphysics, and what changes in us when we experience those levels, which is perhaps a more psychodynamic perspective. So some, like Jung, see inner experience as an encounter with aspects of psyche. Others, like Cynthia Bourgeault, see it as an entering into and a participation in a living field of consciousness. So let's start with Jung. Psyche for Jung, he saw it as emerging from a common underlying unknowable ground. It's one transpersonal continuity intrinsic to all existence, and that includes matter. Psyche structures how reality organizes itself and how it appears in our experience. Our ego, or our small I, is that part of the wider psyche that we identify with and over which we have some control. And he calls that the subjective psyche. That is surrounded by the unconscious, which he calls the objective psyche, which includes the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, which is a universal, unchanging, archetypal foundation of the psyche. The psyche is as real as the physical world. They're coextensive. And in fact, psyche is primary. Matter, ego consciousness, and spirit shade into each other or interpenetrate. They're different degrees or states of psyche. And psyche is objective or independent of us. We know about it through direct personal experience, either through our inner experiences or through our projections onto the outer world. So ego consciousness is influenced by instincts as well as spirit. And Jung talks about the pressure on us from spirit in terms of diamonds. And we're going to come back to those. So psyche is one continuous field. The same structuring patterns or movements will exert pressure everywhere. Going deep into ourselves will show us something that is universal. Earlier, we saw that opening to these depths has both physical, energetic, and mental symbolic quality. So I want to try and give an example of both of these sides. And for me, the examples of Kundalini and Diamonds illustrate both these dimensions. I'll start with Kundalini, which is perhaps associated with a more bodily experience. So the energy can be a purely physical release that temporarily resets an equilibrium, but nothing really changes. But at its most profound, it can be a bodily participation in transformation. The experience feels meaningful, and there are real changes to the person's attitude. People have tried to study Kundalini, and Dr. Lee Sanella, a medical doctor, was one of these who interviewed a lot of his patients, and these described a sense of heat and or cold, internal light or sounds, varying amounts of pain throughout the body, emotional, mental, and thought disruptions, detachment, dissociated cognitive states, and out of body experiences. My experience involved intense, challenging energetic states, but they were also ecstatic and very satisfying. A sense of being seized by an overwhelmingly powerful, deeply feminine, intelligent energy that was streaming or radiating through me, inward shaking, changing heart rhythms, heat, physical pain, involuntary physical movements, straining and changes in breathing, and powerful emotional and dreamlike inner processes and emotional release. Jung did a seminar on Kundalini in 1932, and he says that Kundalini Shakti is an autonomous archetypal process which is experienced as a direct embodied awareness of an impersonal, independent dimension of being or non-ego. The system of Tantra is a symbolic theory of the psyche, which aligns with the individuation process, which, as you know, is the integration of conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves so that we develop a unique identity apart from the crowd in conscious relation to the self. So Jung connects Kundalini Shakti with Sophia, the eternal feminine principle, and it's a cross-cultural phenomenon. Apparently, it seems like in our time, it's increasingly being experienced by Westerners. Now, we don't know if Carl Jung experienced Kundalini, but he may have done, because he writes, I stagger, drunk with fire. I drank fire in this night. I rose up drunk from the sun with a burning countenance, and my head is ablaze. Give me your hand, a human hand, so that you can hold me to the earth with it, for whirling veins of fire swoop me up. An exultant longing tears me towards the zenith. When he talks about such experiences, Jung says the numinosum is a dynamic existence or effect not caused by an act of will. It seizes and controls the human subject, which is its victim. It is perfectly possible psychologically for the unconscious or an archetype to take complete possession of a man and to determine his fate. So that was a bit about Kundalini as one expression of an experience of deep psyche. Diamonds are perhaps a more mental or symbolic experience of opening to our depth, which can take the form of inner visions, figures, or entities. So Jung says, I learned to take seriously every unknown wanderer who personally inhabits the inner world, since they're real because they're effectual. And it begs the question of whether we also have an impact on what we encounter. So Jung says that diamonds are a force of consciousness with its own agenda. The Greek word daimon expresses a determining power which comes upon man from the outside, like providence or fate, though the ethical decision is left to man, Jung writes. So we always have a choice in how we respond to what comes towards us from the unconscious. The underlying conscious psychic life is pre-existent to it. At first, it's unconscious, and then as it approaches consciousness, it appears projected in figures like gods, diamonds, and so on, whose numen seems to be the vital source of energy. And as these figures fade, the ego seems to come into possession of this source of energy. On the one hand, man seeks to seize this energy, to possess it, and on the other hand, he is possessed by it. The diamond would like to inflame you to embrace their work, which isn't yours, and you believe that it is you and that it is your work. Kalsched, who is a philosopher who writes about the metaphysics of Jung, calls what Jung calls psyche cosmic consciousness. Jung's diamonds are autonomous, dissociated aspects of the collective unconscious. They're like us, they're dissociated alters in this greater mind, he says. We experience diamonds as real, autonomous forms of consciousness with their own laws and their own agenda. They are blind, irrational, amoral, personified expressions of archetypal forces that have an unpredictable and ambiguous quality. Auguste agrees with Jung. He says, for better or for worse, we can yield control and be taken over by these autonomous psychic forces. Now, Donald Castrop, I think, adds a really important piece to this discussion. He talks of the archetypal self-care system, and he links Diamond's personal complexes and trauma and illustrates the way mental and physical phenomena interpenetrate. Early trauma, he says, causes our psyche to dissociate and split off unbearable emotional pain. That causes the most vital, feeling, soulful parts of ourselves to be hidden away from consciousness and sealed off from the outside world to keep them safe. And that's what gives rise to these deep, archetypally patterned, trauma-based complexes in the personal unconscious. And they can take the form of protector figures like angels, terrifying persecutor figures, and also overpowering feelings or moods, or restrictive body armor. So I wonder whether the link between trauma complexes and diamonds might be their shared archetypal patterning or resonance. Does our particular wounding and therefore our protector and persecutor figures and the nature of our desires resonate with the diamonds that personify those matching archetypal patterns? So that particular complexes in diamonds mesh and interpenetrate. That's the case. How might that work? So Jung says that diamonds attach themselves to our complexes and energetically infuse them. They light them up, as it were. When complex resists the energy flow of the diamond, we feel that. We become aware of the complex, and then we can integrate aspects of it as part of our individuation process, which then gives a sense of meaning and purpose. James Hillman, who was a Jungian, says, yeah, okay, but we need our wounds and complexes because they're soul-making forces. Diamonds express themselves through our wounds and complexes, and that's what gives the force to individuation. It's like water needs banks to become a river, otherwise it's a lake or a marsh. How we wrestle with the diamonds transforms the complex and shapes our calling and destiny. So our task is not to resolve or get rid of our complexes, but to engage with them and to find symbolic meaning in them. So something can emerge out of the tension between complex and diamond. So far we've looked at these experiences through a mostly psychological lens. We've tried to understand the experience of something other taking hold of us, which we can feel physically, energetically, and mentally, symbolically. We saw that Jung says that reality exists independently, but we can only know it through the psyche's objective transpersonal structures, which is the archetypes. And diamonds are how we can experience these archetypal forces in an autonomous personified form. That's not to say that they're simply subjective, but actually Jung doesn't say what diamonds are apart from our experience of them in the objective psyche. Castrop said that diamonds are dissociated alters in a cosmic mind. Kalsched links our experience of diamonds to trauma. And Hillman says that diamonds are archetypal intelligences that hold the image of our unique destiny. And that gives a kind of inner pressure to embody that, regardless of our or our society's ideas of success or well-being. But when we ask, is there something that wants to step over into visible life, we can also look at it another way. Cynthia Bourgeault doesn't use the word daimon, but she speaks of similar experiences. For her, the experience of beings is a mediated way of knowing genuine intelligences or ordering principles that are ontologically real. They are not reducible to the psyche. The chain of being, which of course a lot of people have spoken of, is a single continuum of energy in various degrees of subtlety or coarseness. There's a range of interpenetrating worlds or varying bandwidths of conscious experience or subtleties of perception. So when Bourgeault talks of worlds, she's not talking about localities. It's about a different way of tuning awareness within our embodied being. Each world, she says, has a different number of laws or restrictions pertaining to it, which gives a sense of different levels of density or constraints at each bandwidth of perception and response. In our everyday lives, by default, we're focused on survival and manipulation of material reality. So we end up screening out these subtle, more subtle resonances. And Bourgeault talks of something called the imaginal realm. She says we can't know the most subtle realms of spiritual intelligence directly. They have different kinds of perception and knowing. But the imaginal realm is a kind of an interface. It's an intermediate realm or type of awareness. So that in this realm, we receive subtle knowledge in a way that we can actually grasp intuitively through the heart rather than through rational linear thinking. So we can tune our awareness to pick up these subtle resonances in an instant, symbolic, participatory way. And a person can feel illuminated from within, which can feel intensely enlivening and meaningful. It can give insight through symbols or bodily sensations and an inner sense of purpose or direction. And we can experience that something other taking hold and radiating through us. For Bourgeault, there is an ontological reality to what we experience as spiritual intelligences or beings. And there is some kind of energetic exchange that has a role in cosmic evolution. So I'll give you three examples of Kundalini journeys that gave me a sense of energetic enlivening and of being taken hold of by something other. As a general thing, times with the energy for me are a bit like holotropic breath work or spontaneous active imagination. Besides the physical experiences, I have strange thoughts, inner narratives that seem deeply true and meaningful while I'm in them. But I also observe them, and I know that I'm in an altered state, and I can come out of it when I need to. If somebody rings the doorbell, I can go and open up. So this was one experience in 2007 where I felt very drawn to embodying an energy or presence. I asked for it to replace my core and to let us merge. That results, each time I ask for that, it results in a strong energetic response, which is exhausting and intense. My back arcs, I have a strong sense of this inner presence, and I yearn to keep going. I ask for it to align me with it, for the connection to become permanent, for help to adjust to it so that I can keep functioning in everyday life. I would give anything for this to happen, to the extent that I agree to what feels like a Faustian pact with the devil to be shown the truth about existence and who I am. And this is one occasion when the terror of having experienced something in one of these altered states spilled over into my waking life. I was really scared for a while that I might have signed my soul away. And it was only reading Jung and his work on the shadow that helped me to let go of that. The energy only responds to my complete abandon to the process. I have to trust and just give myself over. Now, I assume that my narrative of this and other experiences is just my mind trying to make sense of something that really I can't understand. This was a more physical experience of Kundalini. There was a sense of ecstasy as the presence and I drink from one another as one being, and I ask to be changed so that we can be one. I feel as though I'm being joined at the front of my body, as though zipped up along my chakras. And the presence enters through these chakras, and I feel myself flowing into it with a sense of mutual feeding, a mutual flow and exchange, an abandonment and merger. Sorry. I have a deep sense of connection. I ask for it to feast on me, to make me drink, to seal a bond or contract. I feel repulsed and guilty as I gorge at the throat of another, but it actually feels necessary. And then I feel like I'm feeding through the whole of my being. So this experience seems very aligned with the stories of vampires. And I did wonder whether these stories are based on this kind of experience, but maybe I'm just trying to conceptualize the experience with reference to the myths. Very difficult to know. Um, this was perhaps a more mental experience where I again I give over, I ask to be altered, and I'm being made part of a hive mind, as a bit like the Borg in Star Trek. This wave after wave of being held in this energy, bathing in a blissful presence. I feel like this is what I am. I become part of this being, enter into another reality, feel that I'm being altered and experimented on by others and taken over and eventually joined to the hive. So all these experiences seem to have common components of feeling like I'm being taken over, I'm being fundamentally changed and joined with something bigger than me that expresses itself through me. And the experience has physical and mental components combined with intense feeling. So let's listen to our depth. How do we get the message? There is a general agreement that there is a sense of directional pressure through dreams, symbols, insights, energetic flow, and so on, as well as through disruption and illness, where we've resisted that pressure. People talk about it in different ways, but these approaches seem to complement each other um, in terms of how they see the insights as being conveyed. So Jung talks about the transcendent function, Bourgeault about the law of three, and Gabor Mate about trauma and illness, which is a more biopsychosocial model. For Jung, archetypal pressure towards wholeness can activate a process of simple compensation so that the psyche self-regulates through dreams, symptoms, addictions, and so on. And we can be unconscious of it. And it's not necessarily transformative, it's just something that happens. A particular form of compensation, though, is what he calls the transcendent function, which involves conscious awareness and an energetic shift. It comes out of the psyche holding a tension between opposites for long enough for a synthesis to emerge. And that can be a new possibility of some kind, a conscious symbol, a feeling, an insight, maybe an attitude, an embodied shift, and so on. And crucially, the experience is felt as not coming from the ego. When we experience archetypal forces in a personified form, like diamonds, that archetypal pressure could feel like the diamond's communication, symbolized in images, feelings, insights, and so on. It's not necessarily spoken words in that way. Cynthia Bourgeault speaks of the law of three. Now, this is a universal law, not a psychic process. The ego doesn't have to be involved at all, although she says conscious attention does bring a different quality of outcome. She also talks about opposing forces. There's an active force pushing to come into being or become conscious, and a negating or resisting force, perhaps matter or our limited capacity. And these poles co-create, they define each other, and you can't eliminate one of them to resolve the tension. As the pressure builds and the tension is held, a third mediating force is constellated. The imaginal field is one expression of that mediating force. So subtle intelligence shades into everyday awareness in this imaginal field in the form of dreams, symbols, and so on. And to engage with it involves consent and participation in a living field. Then a shift happens, a fourth new thing arises, a transformative leap to a new state of being, which integrates both poles at a new level so that a new spiritual insight arises, but it can equally well be met in the external world as a circumstance or fate. It feels given because it arises from the field and not from our ego. So that again is similar to Jung. So an example might be when I think this is not Bourgeault's example, this is my interpretation. An example might be when Kundalini activates a complex which resists it, and then out of that we get a new insight or a sense of meaning. I also wonder whether we can experience the transcendent function or third force engagement and shift physically as Kundalini. So Chris Beisch, who is a emeritus professor in religious study, who did a sequence of, I think, 72 extremely high dose LSD sessions, which he documented and writes about in his book LSD and the Mind of the Universe. He says that complexes are lodged in the chakras. Kundalini can activate the chakras, and that exposes and engages the complexes to give a sense of the numinous, those ecstatic energies, insights, and experiences. Dana Swain, who is a Jungian research psychologist who herself has experience of Kundalini and has written about that in a book. She did some research with a number of her clients, and she writes about that in a book, When the Light Breaks Through. All these, there's loads of references at the end, which I'll just run you through for future reference if you're interested to follow up. So she says Kundalini is a connection between ego and self present in the physical body as somatic phenomena, in the psyche as image and feeling, and on a transpersonal level as numinous experience resulting in psychological change. Gabor Mate comes at it from a completely different angle, sort of biopsychosocial perspective. But I think he still refers to a similar innate pressure in existence. He says there is an inner organizing principle or drive towards psychic balance. At birth, we instinctively know what we need to authentically become ourselves. But because of our dependence on others and social demands on us, and because of universal trauma, we have to suppress that knowledge and our real needs, emotions, and boundaries. We have to conform to a degree. And then illness is an expression through the body of what we can't allow ourselves to know or express in other ways. So, in a funny way, it preserves our integrity. Illness, for Mate, it seems to me, sounds like an experience of what Jung and Hillman might call daimonic forces as they manifest through the body. So, back to my own experience, does any of this make any sense? Jung talks of the pleroma and abraxas. So the pleroma is undifferentiated, still pure potential for being and nothingness. It's before anything happens. And then abraxas is a symbol for the manifestation of the pleroma through psyche. So it's a numinous force, creative and destructive, similar to the totality of Shiva and Shakti, and it embraces all opposites. And certainly for most of us, it's beyond human understanding and experience. And Bourgeault agrees. She says there's a limit to the experience most of us can bear in human form. Many of my experiences did give a sense of an infinitely powerful unseen source, of a numinous channeling, mediating, and shielding presence between me, humans in general, and the source, of being held in and moved by a vast force, my ego being in awe and unable to will anything other than total surrender. Except one experience, and I don't understand how I was able to resist. I seemed to have a choice with that terrifying numinous presence that was trying to take me over. So I can't account for that. In some of these experiences, I felt an active part of what was happening in a co creative way. And in others, my witnessing self was off to the side somewhere. I was merely consenting, surrendering myself to be used or to be shown something. I was irrelevant. I was just the occasion for what was happening. So I wonder if I got to see something of how diamond complex pairs in that enmeshed way work in a protective, mediating way. Did psychedelic or Kundalini states retune my awareness so that I could sense the pressure of subtle energy or intelligence against the resistance of my expanded, but of course still very limited capacity? In the imaginal field, did the transcendent function or law of three give rise to my experience of diamonds? And did that shield me by transforming a spiritual, energetic force I would otherwise have been unable to tolerate? Are such experiences subjective, phenomenological evidence of how the experience of diamonds humanizes or personalizes ineffable archetypal energy so it can impact us in a way we can endure and integrate? Are there dangers in opening to these forces? We are stirring deep archetypal waters. Our ego consciousness can be flooded by the energies we tap into, and maybe they even tap into us. We can be seized and drawn in by this power as we surrender in awe, terror, or rapture. And Jung talks about the Dionysian intense call to journey and surrender, a call to the self, which is a normal, healthy part of the individuation process. But it may take us out faster and further than we can hold or integrate, like a riptide into a field of archetypal gravitational pull. And there is the potential of experiencing an overpowering divine madness. Jung himself was scared that he was going to get lost in some kind of psychotic episode. He writes, to the superficial observer, the Red Book will appear like madness. It would also have developed into one had I not been able to absorb the overpowering force of the original experiences. So we may find that there is something beyond our ego that is real and that wants to engage and express itself through us, which could be terrifying. And the psyche has a dark dimension. Destructive forces are intrinsically part of the collective unconscious and of human nature. So diamonds have a light and a dark face. Such experiences can be terrifying, confusing, and disorientating, and they can trigger a powerful process, which, of course, Jung writes about in his Red Book, and Stan and Christina Groff have published a book, Spiritual Emergency, about. So we need to tread carefully. Entering into states of expanded awareness can be healing and transformative, but such processes can throw us off balance. And once triggered, their impact can continue long after the end of a workshop or retreat. So we need social containers for these experiences, ecosystems for support. So far, we have explored these deep movements from the point of view of the individual. We've looked at how psyche informs matter as one transpersonal continuity, so that what moves in us at depth can tell us what might be moving in the world. We looked at how Kundalini and diamonds might reflect the physical, energetic, and mental symbolic qualities of our contact with deep psyche, and how Jung understood Kundalini as part of a symbolic theory of the psyche similar to individuation. What diamonds might be as aspect of psyche, how they might mesh with our personal complexes through trauma-based archetypally patterned resonances, how they might influence us, and whether these diamond complex pairs might function as energetic channels and or mediate energies too great for us to bear. So we looked at how Bourgeault sees experiences in the imaginal realm as a mediated perception of intelligences that are ontologically real and the potential dangers of opening up to such forces. What about the collective? Western culture has become very one-sided. We have a rational, materialist, consumerist worldview, which devalues the archetypal feminine and feminine ways of knowing. Much has fallen out of our conscious awareness. Also, we know that social groups, cultures, and societies can carry trauma, so that when parts of a group's awareness are repressed, collective complexes can form in its group field. So Western culture is likely to carry a range of unconscious complexes. Those collective complexes also resonate and mesh with specific daimons, so that archetypal energy flow erupts into collective awareness. Maybe the increasing polarities in our world and the unraveling and political shifts we're seeing are symptoms of archetypal energy pushing through the blocks of our collective complexes to restore balance. Jung talks about psychic epidemics when societies are seized by mass movements driven by unconscious energies. And of course, potentially, such eruptions do offer a greater awareness of what was repressed, so that we can then integrate that into a more balanced culture. But this asks of us that we consciously engage with that process. So Jung approaches all of that from the point of view of the individual. He says dangerous social developments like we're seeing today happen because not enough of us engage with the process of individuation. People lose a sense of self, they abdicate personal responsibility, and they get swept up in mass movements. Of course, these processes can happen in smaller groups as well. Our sense of self and our experience can dissolve in the fluidity of the group field. Hannes Gergen and John Freeman talk about this in terms of relational being. So Gergen says we are not boundaried, autonomous selves entering into relationships. We actually emerge from relationships. Think of a baby being born into a negotiated field with its parents and getting reflected back to it how other people perceive it to be. It's a kind of negotiation, and then the wider society. So our thoughts and feelings, our memory and identity are not wholly inside our mind. They emerge out of the dynamics of relationships in a process of negotiation or co-creation. Freeman says, yes, we are differentiated systems nested in larger systems, holons within holons. You can treat groups as living, adaptive, relational ecologies which are fluid, responsive, and interdependent. The universal field has its own laws or flow, like music that we dance to, and you can be more or less in step with it. Small groups are the same. The field between us has its own dynamic, and we are more or less resonant or aligned with it. And of course, many of us have experienced times of resonance in a group. We can sense a sudden shift in atmosphere, feeling, or energy, or a momentum that takes hold, that influences people's thoughts and behavior. Think of football crowds or political rallies or online echo chambers. So as participants, we are subfields held in a larger field of the group. We may feel distinct, but our mind body is permeable and part of the group field. Entering non-ordinary states of awareness opens us further to sensing the energy and information held in that field, including archetypal forces and diamons. So could a kind of collective amplification or feedback loop be happening between personal and collective resonances to give a kind of meta-resonance? Maybe that could happen in two ways, where similar trauma-based complexes are activated in several people to give a collective resonance in the group field, and the diamond is constellated in that group field. Or there could be an unacknowledged group complex which constellates a collective resonance or diamond in the group field, which then activates people's personal complexes. And you could get a feedback loop through this. So Jung says to support the collective, we need to take responsibility for our own individuation. If we can actively engage with the unconscious and embrace the contradictions in our nature, rather than disowning and projecting them, we can genuinely see and engage with the other. We can resist losing ourselves in a kind of groupthink and destructive psychic epidemics. And we can live more self-reflectively, true to ourselves and in relationship to the self. And that is what decides whether, as they break through, these forces destroy us or bring renewal and growth. But you can look at it more systemically as well. Cynthia Bourgeault says that we're moving from a disintegrating mental rational structure, our main Western worldview, in which the collective is seen as a collection or aggregate of individuals. The functioning unit of consciousness is the individual boundaried ego. Information flows from the part to the whole, and the focus is on individual rights. So we're moving from that kind of experience to a new emerging structure in which the functioning unit of consciousness is an interpenetrating, diffused witnessing self. The information flow is also from the whole to the parts, and the focus is now on the common good. So the third force or shift that we're making is the leap from a focus on individual rights to a focus on common good. And the common good is a property that emerges from systemic consciousness. So systems can develop their own intelligence. Quite a lot of people say that now. Out of a reciprocal flow of information between the whole and the parts, so that the greater the number, complexity, and diversity of relationships that exists, the greater the information flow and the brighter the consciousness. Systemic wisdom emerges fluidly and changes with the situation. It's constantly recalibrating itself out of that intelligent, flexible listening by that diffused witnessing self to changes within the system. And individuals can register the common good holographically because the whole is reflected in all its parts. And to the extent that you are in touch with that, that gives you a sense of coherence and well-being. So we need to trust enough to open ourselves to the depth of the psyche and listen. And I think politically that means that we need to find ways to register the inner knowingness that emerges in individuals out of their resonance holographically with the knowingness in the system. Laszlo talks about something similar. He talks about the Akashic field, which is a universal, subtle, dynamic, formative, non-local cosmic information field. It has this systemic intelligence and self-organizing wisdom embedded in it. And that gives an evolutionary movement towards wholeness, consciousness, resonance, and coherence. Because smaller complex systems, for instance us, contains all the information about the entire field, we can tune into that intuitively by stilling our mind and entering expanded states of consciousness. That gives us a direct experience of how everything is connected and a deep knowledge for how humanity should live, which sounds to me very like Bourgeault's common good. And it does seem that more people are opening up to non-ordinary states and experiences, but our Western culture has no container for them. It has no words to think about and share them, and it doesn't welcome them as part of normal human experience. So we need to move the Overton window, what's called the Overton window, which is what can be freely shared and talked about in mainstream society. So to conclude, seems humanity cannot solve its problems through ego, willpower, and a heroic stance. We need to engage both feminine and masculine ways of knowing. We need to see how what moves in us also moves in the world around us. We need to sense into that depth and integrate what we can into conscious awareness as part of our individuation. And that may involve us registering the communication from Diamons. As we open into non-ordinary states of consciousness, can we experience phenomenologically in the imaginal field those personified archetypal forces that resonate with the harmonies of existence and the common good? As we hear those voices of collective wisdom, will we respond with discrimination through conscious, deliberate choices, individually and collectively? Of course, I don't know the ontological reality behind what we experience as diamonds or spiritual beings. But as we honor a diamond's message, can we align ourselves to hear its music and dance something of its essence into being as we co-create our future? And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. I'll just flick through for the recording these books. So if anybody wants to kind of have a further read, these are all interesting books. And these are the regular references. Great. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah, hopefully see you next time. Bye.